We're recording, so that's good. So there is a God. G'day everyone, it's Craig from People with a Passion with Andrea Powles-Gullick of Soulful Living with Andrea. How are you going, Andrea?
Yeah, really well. Thanks, Craig.
It's good to have you here on the show today. Hopefully we'll have some really insightful discussions. What I wanted to first talk about is your name, Soulful Living. What made you arrive at that name for your courage coaching business?
It was a bit of a journey, really. My journey into what I'm now doing as an intuitive courage coach really started with an essential oil business, so I didn't actually realise this is where I was going with it.
Mm-hmm.
It was just been more about my journey in terms of really understanding that my beliefs are that there's a little bit more than just our physical being, and that the outside energies really do contribute to how we can live our life with mindset and being courageous and making different choices for our life, really.
The use of the word soulful tells me that you're on a spiritual journey. Would that be a good assumption?
Very much so. I guess it's more of a knowing of who I am and what my beliefs are, and it's definitely around our soul being and really the ego, which is about mindset and inner critic, but also the soul, which is our true passion and purpose.
So you just mentioned ego there. So give us that definition again of what you see ego is, or it probably wasn't the full definition, but do you want to touch on ego a little bit and how you perceive ego?
Yeah, sure. So for most of my life, I thought ego was what I would classify egocentric. So when you have an inflated belief of who you are and what you're about in other people's lives, whereas ego really for me is about the inner critic and those limiting beliefs that can get in the way of us actually just being our true soulful self.
Okay, so that's a little bit about, I guess, self-awareness would come into that, I'm assuming. So it's sort of getting a better understanding, would you say, of who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. And awareness is one of the key words that I use with my clients, and it's been the key really to my personal growth journey, was to have this ongoing awareness and understanding of really who we are, how we became who we are. So the belief systems are really programmed into us in terms of the different relationships that we have and the experiences that we have in life. So the awareness of what runs subconsciously and being able to have the awareness to bring them into the conscious so that we can make really courageous changes in life.
Yeah. You touched on the word journey there. So let's, as I do with most of my guests, let's talk about your journey. This has become a passion for you. You didn't arrive here overnight. You literally have had life experiences that have drawn you towards this. Do you want to speak to some of the experiences you've had that have influenced the way you think about the world and how you've arrived to be where you're at today?
Yeah, sure. So for me, why I'm an intuitive courage coach is because those two things in terms of intuition, it has become really apparent to me that we can tap into a inner knowing of different experiences, but really the courage, I guess, that part of the journey came from I was married relatively young. I always just wanted to get married and have children, and I did that to a wonderful man. And when we had our first child, he was 2 days old when he was diagnosed with neuroblastoma, which is a childhood cancer. He had a grapefruit-sized tumour in his abdomen. So he had a 10-month journey with chemotherapy and surgery and went into remission, which we were incredibly lucky, actually, because the whole way our oncologist had said that really was the best time for a child to have it, because the tumour works differently or responds differently. So
is that something around the immune system as well? Because my understanding is babies are born with this really good immune system early that's there to protect them early. Is that something you're aware of?
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because he actually didn't start treatment. His name's Geordie. and he didn't start treatment until he was 8 weeks old because they wanted to monitor it. So he had ongoing ultrasounds to just measure the size, because their hope was that for neonates, they have this incredible ability where the tumours can begin to shrink and actually just
It's almost a superhuman thing. It's one of those things, I haven't looked into it, but I'm aware of that. I've heard that a newborn's immune system, maybe because they're entering the world where there's all these potential, like it's a survivalist thing that's built into a baby to actually have a high immunity to a lot of things. It would probably be only natural that would be something that we would be born with, given that we're entering a world full of nasties.
Yeah,
So,
maybe. It was just really explained to us that it wasn't really explained in a way of the immune system, but I guess I understand that is possibly what it was. But he unfortunately didn't have that, and it continued to grow. So they started treatment when he was 8 weeks old, and it was to shrink the tumour so that the surgery would be the least invasive.
Sure.
And they wanted to try and keep his left kidney, and that unfortunately they couldn't. It was too intricately involved.
Okay.
But people live with one kidney all the time. So if that was what the payoff had to be, then we were just super relieved, and we
Sure.
basically just got on with life after that.
So he overcame it. He went into remission. So how long was the process when he was a baby before they felt that they were on top of all that?
So they just went through the process of really the size of the tumour. So he had 8 months of chemotherapy. I think maybe he had 6 sessions in that time, and then he would get sick and enter back into hospital. If you've ever, had to walk the path of cancer with someone, you would know that it just smashes the immune system, and they're very susceptible. So he started to get quite sick at the end of the treatment, because obviously they were really cranking it up to do the best they could at killing it off, the cells. But once the surgery was complete, there was no follow-up treatment for him, and basically he was just classified that he was in remission.
Yes.
And our oncologist had said that it really needed to be, they allow 5 years from the time someone goes into remission before they will actually state that they're cured.
He's how old now?
He is now nearly 16. He'll be 16 on the 19th of September.
Okay, that's pretty good. And it was probably a obstacle that you felt you and your husband had overcome, and a scary one at that. Was that your firstborn as well? Was he your firstborn?
Yeah, he was our first child. Yes.
Yeah, so that would have been I imagine, a really troublesome period in your life like firstborn, to be diagnosed with cancer out of the womb, and then you started on your journey, and you had another one come along, another son, was it?
That's right.
Yeah.
Tag.
Yes. So so your family was growing, and then you strike another piece of adversity. Do you want to speak to what happened?
Yeah. So we went on to have another child, Tag, and that was in January of 2006. And we're just getting on with life. And Geordie turned 3 on the 19th of September, and on the 21st of September, my husband was unfortunately killed in a car accident.
You spoke to me earlier, and this is where the spiritual journey begins, I believe, from what you said. You always had this feeling of intuition, and you advised that you felt that, even though you couldn't put your finger on it, that you always felt that there was going to be something in your husband where there was that potential that he could pass. Do you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, sure. I had always had a feeling, and I had often come home, or had come home a couple of times, quite upset, because I just had this inner feeling that he could be taken in a car accident. I never thought that he would get sick, or that there would be a farm accident. It always seemed to be this kind of like a dark cloud. In fact, I went on a widows forum after the accident, and someone actually posted about this. Did anyone feel this heaviness? And that's how I explain it, that as much as I didn't dwell on it every day, there was definitely times where I just had this really heavy feeling of dread around an accident.
And as uncanny as it sounds, it's a sad situation, but you indicated that his uncle had passed in a car accident as well, and that you felt maybe was driving this feeling that something may happen to him, but sadly, the accident occurred at the same intersection that his uncle died at.
Yeah, that's right. So for me, I just felt like I couldn't I couldn't explain it, and in some ways I felt quite crazy for some time with these beliefs and these feelings, but it was definitely around that they were connected in a much deeper sense than uncle and nephew. And I couldn't explain that until the police told me where the accident had occurred, and when they said where it was, and the realization that he had actually lost his life at the same place, it was like this knowing of I had this inner sense, but I just felt crazy with it, I guess.
You
because
couldn't put your finger on it because it just seems surreal. It's something that you couldn't explain. I'd imagine that it's something you can only describe to someone. So metaphysical, you can describe it, but you can't define it.
Yeah, and I guess because I hadn't really explored spirituality, this was before I was kind of thrust into a situation where I needed to know what was out there and really what goes on for humans past this whole just physical. We're born, we go to school, we get a job, we die and we go. And so it was that really sparked this spiritual journey of that there is more, because I knew this as much as I couldn't put it into words or be able to express it to people, probably for fear of judgment and feeling really quite crazy. There was almost like this relief that I wasn't crazy.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting because I touched on it earlier that my mother had experiences when she was younger. And we talk about women's intuition, by the way. And I don't know whether it's some people are just more attuned to something that may exist beyond us. And I don't look at it, some things, like I was saying earlier, as crazy. People, what I've learnt is that, and I talk about personal truths, that while most people would think truth is actually, it's either right or wrong, but I think that truths are actually something that we can all have a different version of reality, if that's so to speak, or what we believe. And therefore, I don't judge someone if something is real for them, as crazy as it may sound. I just think that at the end of the day, we're all finding our feet, we're all finding that journey, and we have no idea what's right or wrong to judge anyone on what they may see as their reality, if that makes sense. So I think that whole start of the process for you has driven you to probably where you need to be today. But let's speak to losing your husband. That put you, as you would expect, into a really sad situation with two young children without their father, and you're having to deal with that, put you into, obviously, depression. So do you want to talk around the little period where you were struggling with things?
Yeah, sure. So I'm not 100% sure where the grief journey became the depression journey, but I guess the defining moment of knowing that I was no longer able to really mask what was basically an internal journey, because I think what is really common with possibly grief and maybe mental health is that we can put on a really good mask.
A brave face, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And
we don't tend to show the world what we're feeling on the inside. We just present this, I'm resilient, I'm robust. And is that ego, actually? Is that part of the...
absolutely, that inner critic, because I guess the story that I kept telling myself was that I didn't want to be a victim. So my husband and his family are extremely resilient people, and really my husband's the one sort of quote that I always came back to on this journey was, "You can't worry about what you can't change." And so that's really, I have this really strong feeling that he taught me how to live without him when our son was sick. because he was the one that would hold me before we would go back to the hospital when I was upset. And he would say, we just got to get this done. This is just what we've got to do, Andrea. And so I felt like I would be dishonouring him and really doing him a disservice if I became this victim of my circumstances. And so I just got on with it because that's what you do. And that was external. Internally, I didn't have a clue what I was doing or who I was or how I could manage this situation, because he was the pillar of strength. I mean, I was the basket case, and that's the limiting beliefs of, and that's that mindset of the stories just would shout at me about, you can't. I was a failure. I couldn't even get grief right. I mean, who doesn't get grief right? And so internally, I was self-combusting, I guess, but externally I had it together. I was making choices about the future, and, some of them were right and some of them were wrong, but, from the external, it looked like I was, getting the job done and moving forward. But so it brought me to a point where I was driving home thinking, I can't live this life. I didn't necessarily want to die, and I don't feel like I was suicidal, but I just didn't know how to live this life as it was with this pain every day. And so I wondered how I could make it look like an accident. And when I look at this and think about this, it hurts me, because my husband, that would have given anything to have been there to watch his children grow up, and here I was thinking, well, I have to go and be with him. And I had thoughts around that I can't leave the boys because that would leave them orphans, and I was thinking about how that would impact on everybody else.
Yes.
And I do believe that's the difference between someone that's suicidal. When the pain gets to that so excruciating that you can no longer actually think or feel others, that's when it can get really quite frightening.
So and that's tough, and you're one of many people that go through that. It's interesting. We were talking about mental health issues earlier, and how, if you don't experience it, how we're all touched by people who are or do. And then there's particularly males. They say the campaign "Are You Okay?" these days, because of the high incidence of not only youth suicide among males, but just in general males suiciding. That because of that outward shell that we present to the world, that mask, that people aren't asking the right questions at times, particularly when someone's gone through a period. They just look like they're coping, and because they look like they're coping, we're less likely to actually stop and ask, are you okay? So you talked a little bit about, before we came on air, about guilt, and how there was a process that you believed there was a degree of feeling guilty, not so much about that, but obviously that was feeling guilty too, that your husband couldn't be there to see the kids grow up. You couldn't. You were thinking that way.
There's such a thing as survivor's guilt, and it was this overwhelming feeling of guilt. But I also knew that my life had changed irreversibly, and for me to be able to get better and be able to continue moving forward, I needed to make some changes. I had started a uni degree by that stage. I was a hairdresser, and I had gone to uni to become a teacher. And so we lived on a farm that was 20 minutes away, and I would trek into a town half an hour and then go to uni and then come back. And it was just, I just felt like it was a lot of pressure. And
I know you had to find a career, but was it something also masking a degree of, was that another mask to say, keep yourself busy, keep yourself busy, keep yourself busy? And obviously you had to raise your kids too, so was it any of that involved in that decision making?
Absolutely. So the two reasons that I went to uni fundamentally were, one, I made decisions to distract myself. I didn't really immerse myself in the pain. I just did things to distract myself. so that I could just get on with it. But the second reason that I went to uni was that I had applied and got into uni and made the decision that I would go to Melbourne instead of Bendigo, and had always probably regretted deferring uni. But as an 18-year-old, I kind of thought I knew more than what I did. But I wanted to be able to, one, I had an interest and a passion for education and with children and things like that. But it was more so that these two little boys that I had, so our second son was obviously 8 months old and our eldest son was 3, that even if they didn't understand then, that they would actually grow up and look back and be able to understand that if mum did that, I can't ever let anything get in the way of my dreams.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of my reasoning for going and getting a uni degree and becoming a teacher was what I wanted to role model to them.
You had a period of depression. It was clinical depression too. So they gave you medication. Do you want to speak to the whole concept of how that actually did help you regain a sense of direction in your life?
Yeah, so because the easiest way that I can explain what the depression felt like for me was that from the minute my eyes opened to the time that they closed, it was like a washing machine of thoughts in my mind. It was just constant, this is what I need to do, but I don't know how to do it, and I feel really guilty, and I don't know how to, just that whole, it was just like a washing machine. And so because it had got to such an overwhelming point where I really just didn't know how to live this life, once I started medication, it really slowed that down. It allowed my inner critic and the ego to kind of take a back seat in what was driving my life, and I was able to actually create a plan and action it, and that was to move off the farm and to rent in town and to make a few other changes that were insignificant, but they were things that I couldn't action beforehand. And so it gave me what I would say was just a level playing field to make conscious, well thought out steps forward. And my life really did start to become what I would say I was more in control of than it being this out of control roller coaster of guilt and shame and overwhelm. It took me a long time to take the step to go and seek help, but I always saw it as a resource. So this was not going to be the safety net for the rest of my life. This was a resource that I could lean into to be able to get to that level playing field so I could make positive and proactive steps forward. And so that then became a search for other methods of being able to control that inner critic and being able to keep that level playing field.
So is this where your journey, your spiritual journey, probably takes off after you've overcome the depression? You're getting a clearer mind and you're starting to pursue some life-changing and make some life-changing decisions. Does that sort of put you on this journey of self-discovery and what life's about? Is that when you start to ask those questions, or were you asking those questions prior to that but not finding the answers that you wanted where you were looking?
I think I've always had an element of this stuff to my personality. I had always been intrigued, but life was just busy and I never really delved into it. So the first step really that I took was I was recommended feel the fear and do it anyway. And so I started the whole reading.
I love that title. I never read the book. I heard the title. Things certainly stick with me over time. So you can speak to the book. What did that book actually do for you?
So for me personally, I had also had another experience prior to this where, a choice that I had made as probably a distraction it ended. So I'd started a relationship and it ended, and I really did sort of sink into that. I'm unlovable. I'm a widow. I have too much baggage. I don't want to live on my own for the rest of my life. And I really did throw a bit of a pity party at this stage. And this experience was that it was almost like there was an outer voice that I heard that said, my happiness is my responsibility. And that really was the catapult into taking back control and taking responsibility. I don't believe that we can ever create any change if we actually don't take responsibility for our part that we play. And so that kind of took me on this journey of actually, what is it about me that I need to become aware of so that I can be okay on my own, if that is my journey for the rest of my life, and be able to actually step forward and choose happiness. And that led me to kind of exploring different options, which was, so that book really, the most poignant part of the book for me was this notion, being able to say no. So the people pleasing, so being afraid of judgment and criticism and
what other people think, that holds you back as well, because you're too busy worrying about what people actually would think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's the most, because it's quite some time ago, obviously, that I read it. That was like the biggest aha moment, was this: as long as we are not intentionally setting out to harm another, if our choices inadvertently create distress for them, it's actually not ours to own.
Okay.
But on the flip side, responsibility is key, because therefore, if that is your belief system, you have to take responsibility of how you allow others to impact you. No one makes us happy. No one makes us angry. That is a direct response that we choose a lot of the time subconsciously.
Yeah. It's interesting that you make those statements, because my philosophy is our happiness is linked to people. So in the sense that if someone else is unhappy, that can make me unhappy. Now, we can control our happiness, but in the same way, if I go prop someone up, that often makes me feel good about myself. And I think also people who can be destructive are often people who feel bad about themselves. And if they actually just flipped it and started to speak nice to people and be good to people, that what they do is they can impact other people's lives. Yes, we control it at our end, but at the same time, I feel like our life experiences, if you're looking for happiness, I feel like if you're looking for happiness, then our happiness is actually linked intrinsically to others. If you actually think about all the times in your life where you have adversity, or you experience sadness, and loss is a big example of that those experiences are linked to someone, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess I still feel like it's, the journey for me is being about understanding the meaning I'm making of those experiences still. So
it's your interpretation at the time, and you control that. Is that, do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, so really external situations are really stimuli. And some are really quite traumatic, and some are really quite exciting and, feverish and amazing. But it's still, and it's, a lot of it happens subconsciously, but it is still of our choosing how we respond to outside stimuli. And that comes down to how aware we are of the meaning we're making of experiences. Because for me, you could have the experience where someone could say the same thing to two people, and it would be water off a duck's back to one person, and it would be quite hurtful to another. So it's really still that we are in charge, really, of our response systems. As difficult as that is, I'm not downplaying how
hardest time to do that.
Absolutely. And it's an energy thing for me, I guess. An energy in terms of you can walk into a room and literally feel like the life is being sucked out of you if people in that room are sad or unhappy or angry. Whereas you can walk into a room and feel really uplifted just because those people are really happy and excited. It's an energy thing for me too.
Yeah, and maybe like I'm listening to your interpretation of it, and I understand, like, as a journalist, when I studied journalism, we were taught about signifiers and signifieds, that when we communicate, the message is actually within the individual. The way something is interpreted isn't how you think you said it, it's actually how it's been received at the other individuals. Like, they're the ones that create the interpretation at their end. You could write something and like you say, two different people will read into it differently, and that comes from education, experience, beliefs, whatever it may be. And like you say, some might object to something you write and others will agree with it or interpret it completely differently. So I do get that concept, and I think that's probably a good way to, if it helps, again, like you said, if it helps someone gain a better understanding of themselves and a degree of control around how they feel, then that's probably a good approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was the biggest aha moment really for me, because I had lived most of my life thinking the external situations were what created my happiness or my sadness or my distress or my euphoria. And when I began to understand that actually it's me and it's my awareness and my understanding of who we are, that was the reason that I could go on to make courageous choices about how I stepped forward and what I would go after to achieve in life.
Yeah. You've chosen the name Soulful Living with Andrea, which is you, funnily enough. But why the name Soulful Living? What's so important about spirit for you?
I feel like it's actually where the power and the courage comes from, because it's our ability to really know that there is more than just this our physicality and our ego, that, you know, to be able, it helps me, I guess, be able to release some of the tension and struggles that I've had. And also just, it's this ability to be all accepting, really, that there's something a little bit deeper or more powerful than just us and our need to control situations.
So you refer to it as the universe.
Yeah.
So you see us, I'm guessing by that interpretation, you see us all as intrinsically linked with this bigger concept of that everything's just connected. Is that a fair understanding of it, or do you want to define it?
I've actually never really thought into it that much. I just have this knowing, I guess, that there's more out there and that we are all connected, and that a lot of our struggles come from this belief of being disconnected. And probably really for me, this belief that we are here more than just once. So while our physical body may leave, that our soul still exists and still comes back to reface lessons. I feel like
you that's reincarnation. So your belief is reincarnation?
I believe that, we have different contracts that we need to fulfill over lifetimes.
Why do you think then there is a process, if that's the scenario for the spirit, if reincarnation is a thing? And like I said, I don't argue it is or it isn't, I don't know. But why do you think that, what would make it important about from a spiritual perspective that we keep coming back and experiencing this
because we don't learn the
life?
lessons in a lifetime. So for me, if I'm really going to get into it, I believe that we sign contracts in terms of the lessons and the experiences that are important for our soul to undertake, and they can show up in terms of relationships, It can show up in terms of money. It can show up in terms of self-worth. And if the lessons aren't integrated in that lifetime, our soul will come back to revisit.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that you have that perception. Is that something you've arrived at yourself from your own experience, or is it something that you've actually read? And I'll come to why I'm asking this. But is that something you've arrived at, or is it something that you've actually, in readings that you've done, you've come to found that makes sense?
So the process of personal growth, and then obviously the interactions with different people that you have, because as you grow, you tend to attract different, different people.
So this concept of a contract, that you believe that our spirit has a contract, in what way do you mean has a contract? Like with each other, or with the universe, or what? In what way do you describe that?
In terms of your soul and your understanding, so that we will continue to have similar lessons until we understand it. So
Okay.
for me, I feel like my happiness is my responsibility, in terms of I absolutely felt like I needed another person to complete me. This was a childhood belief that to get married, for someone to love me, proved that I was enough. And then when I experienced the loss of my husband, and then it was, facing life on my own again, that literally came back to the forefront of this. I'm unlovable. I will never, I'm going to be on my own.
So from that, I'm deducing that you feel that if reincarnation exists and you're in this life now, then in a previous life it was probably a lesson you still hadn't learned, and similar scenario may have occurred. You may have lost your husband in a previous life.
That's right. So
possibly the explanation of why you felt you were likely to lose your husband.
Yeah, I guess.
Possibly.
Yeah, possibly.
I'm up for all possibilities. I don't,
Yeah.
like I said, I don't judge anyone for what they've come. No one knows. This is the beauty about this, is we really don't know, and anyone who pretends to doesn't know.
Yeah.
It
And I
really
guess
is,
for
so.
me, I see it in my own life, but I also see it in other people's life, but it's kind of not my business. But I keep rehashing the same lesson. Like I keep, there's similar patterns that continue to show up for people. And that's my belief system, is that these are the lessons that they've signed up for, that we all sign up for, and they will play out in different ways. But it's this continual growth of awareness. And as we continue to become more aware and understand ourselves, we can actually sign off some of these contracts.
Yeah. So the reason I asked before whether it's something you've arrived at or something you've read is because as a teenager, I actually read a book that was called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. Have you actually ever encountered that book?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I've heard the 5 people you meet in heaven. I read that.
Okay.
But
So it derives, and it's an explanation around, and it comes to what you're speaking to, is that all of us have a contract with each other to provide ourselves with that spiritual learning that you talk about, and that the fact you're sitting here in front of me right now, we discuss this spiritually, that there's a lesson in it for both of us, and that your being here and my being here is actually not, some people say God's plan if you believe in God, but the concept that everything's pre-orchestrated, and that the fact that you're sitting across this desk from me now, that's not an accident, that whatever lesson or whatever we have to learn, we learn from each other. Now, your husband who passed, his contract to you at the time would possibly be that he actually passed because he was learning a lesson and you were learning a lesson from that. And your child having cancer, he grew up with a lesson that he agreed that he would have that experience as a baby, so you could learn what you needed to learn. So the concept's not new to me, and I find it intriguing. That's why I was asking. I wanted to know how you arrived at it, because there's a book that's all geared around that whole concept of when bad things happen to good people. And it sort of tries to present an argument from a spiritual perspective of how that may actually play out. So this whole concept that you're talking to.
Yeah, so I haven't actually read the book, so it definitely didn't come from that. But I dare say the people that I interact with and the relationships that I now have, because, like I said, as we grow and become more aware, our different people come in to help you with this journey. So it's really probably been through interactions with them. And they're probably like the next level of awareness, because they're really about how the planets and stars align and things like that. So it's really just been that journey that has continued to sort of open up new ways of thinking and ideas. And back then, like right in the eye of the storm, I would have found that a really challenging concept, because for Andrea back then, there was no reason or meaning or explanation that could bring me any peace of the fact that my husband lost his life. There was no way that I would have been able to accept that could have been pre-orchestrated, or it could have had a purpose for me or for my children. I mean, that would have just broken my heart. So, and this is the thing that, there are people that would still find this extremely challenging. But for my journey and for who I am, it brings me a great deal of peace knowing that he played an integral role for everybody that knew him, and that there will come a time where we will reconnect up, and that will be, and that he knows my second husband, that I believe he sent him to me to be able to help me on this journey forward, and to be able to be the most amazing stepdad to our children.
Yeah. So you mentioned aromatherapy earlier. I'm going to hit on that because that's part of an area that studies have shown, and this is to sort of move us along in the conversation, that aromatherapy is actually been proved to help in a number of areas. So why the journey into aromas and how they can help? You went and quickly excused yourself before we started and put a scent on. So
It's called passion.
there you go. So yeah, and I didn't know that. But what's the concept of aromatherapy for you, and why did you delve into that as a passion?
I've always had a very strong sense of, the moisturizer that I wore on my wedding day to my first husband, I still have the container, and if I smell it, it will evoke really powerful, happy memories. Yeah. But I'd never really thought too much into that. And so I embarked on the journey thinking it would be a good thing, not realizing that was probably another kind of key moment in my life of this whole spiritual side of things, because the team that I became a part of, this is where all my new understandings and belief systems come from, because it's quite a spiritual group of beautiful women. So, and basically that was the thing. This literally sent me on a personal journey of really uncovering and untangling this inner critic and mindset, and recognizing that our sense of smell is directly connected to our emotional trigger points in our brain, and that I could use these oils to actually be able to support myself in times of distress, or to anchor in, or to manifest, or to all of the things that I now do, and being able to share that with people, with children, to help them sleep, or women that might be experiencing like anxiety or high intensity emotions and things like that.
You see that as a tool. Do you want to explain why aromatherapy is a tool for you?
Yeah, so it sent me on such a kind of deep dive introspective journey, because the connection that our sense of smell has with our emotional memory. So different scents for me in terms of the lily flowers, I couldn't actually smell them after my husband's accident, because it would take me back to that time and place, and it would give me quite a physical reaction. But when I smelled Lang Lang, one of my oils, it smelt like that, and so I couldn't actually use that oil for quite a period of time. But I slowly began to introduce it, and it actually started to shift that heavy weight and emotion for me. So I've incorporated the use of my essential oils primarily for my emotional stability and personal growth, because I find that they're an amazing tool in terms of being able to calm when we're stressed, being able to desensitize to emotional feelings, being able to anchor powerful mindset.
Yeah, sure.
Because that memory of that smell, if we put ourselves into a state of how we want to feel, the power and knowing of our own ability to create, and then use an oil, we anchor that.
It actually makes sense. I believe that, again, what works for people works for people. It's not surprising that scent would do that, because it certainly occurs with music. That if we hear a song, it can take us back to an emotive state, like a trigger, to how we felt when we perhaps heard that song. It could be a sad song, and it can send us back there. And the same as touch. Like, people like the feel of certain things, and just touching something, whether it's owned by a loved one that was there. Obviously, if you had something of your first husband's, which I'm sure you do, you probably still smell that individual on that person. You still touch it, and it's a connection, and it takes you back. So it's not surprising that smell, another sense, would actually do that.
Yeah, I love the word trigger that you just used, because that is so powerful in the fact that we can be triggered on a uncomfortable type of feeling and mindset, but when we take ownership, we can use different tools to trigger ourselves into that courage and more determined place, and that empowerment of believing in ourselves. And our senses are all connected, really.
So let's talk about soulful living with Andrea now.
Yeah.
And which is why you're here. What are you doing to help? I noticed and identified on your site that, while I'm sure you're happy to help all people, you've picked a niche around mothers and women. And I'm guessing, given your journey, that's not surprising. So do you want to speak to what you're actually doing, and why you've arrived at this point in your life where you feel that need to help others build courage? And you call it the title of Intuitive Courage Coach. Why is it so important to work with women and help build their courage and use their intuition?
I guess because part of my story in terms of mental health was that I really did apply different tools using medication, but then obviously holistic approach as well. And I became probably the most peaceful and calm that I had in a long time. And I had repartnered, and we'd married, and we were really creating quite a beautiful life. And we fell pregnant, and I had done hypnobirthing and was planning a home birth, and felt very strong and very knowing, and I had cured myself of mental health until she was 4 days old, and I ended up with post-traumatic stress and postnatal, and the anxiety was horrendous. So it really did probably sit me on my ass, because I didn't think that I would ever suffer mental health again. I really had this belief that I had all these tools at hand, but a lot of what I distracted myself from after the accident actually revisited. And because the thing with mental health is, and probably post-traumatic stress, is that we have triggers. But until you're triggered, you don't realise
that they're still there.
And so my baby's cry was my trigger.
If that's the approach of reincarnation, and you believe that that is the case, then it's not surprising that you would think you're over it. But if you haven't learned that lesson yet, it's still
it's
there
ready.
to be learned.
It's ready to come back. That's right. And
so how frustrating is that to now? Like, again, you obviously passed that period of post-traumatic stress, but how does that make you feel, knowing even now that potential is still there down the track? That's got to be frustrating.
It's not so much frustrating because I think there's an acceptance around it. I think it was frustrating when it happened because, again, I felt like a failure and, I'm a basket case and I can't get anything right.
How much is that linked to biology, though? Because that's a huge experience. Like, you heard your baby cry, but hormonally, you've just had a baby. So my understanding is there's a whole heap of hormones mixed up and messed up with pregnancy. I'm not a woman, but but I don't know. I'm just saying, is that how much is there any explanation around the biological stress of that? And yes, the trigger with the baby, but was there anything there that...
Look, I'm probably sure that makes total sense, that, your hormones are all over the place. The way that I view it is that I had done a really good job of running from my pain and distracting myself. And this is the one time that I had nowhere to go.
Okay.
That I actually had to sit in this. So
how did you overcome that? And then how does that drive what you're doing now?
So basically, because I was planning a home birth, I had a private midwife who was phenomenal. And so this is where some of the tools that I use, and I guess tools that I actually pass on to my clients, came from, because she gave me a period of time of basically trying to work my shit out, and I wasn't. Before she's pretty black and white, and she'll say it how it is. Yeah, straight shooter.
Which is what you want too, by the way. I think if someone's being false or fake to you, they're not helping you. So if you found someone like that was a straight talker, you probably need that.
Yeah, and it's that what we, revisiting what we were talking about before, is that I thought I was hiring a private midwife to have a home birth. I was hiring, because I had her in hospital in the end, I was hiring this private midwife for the aftercare. Yeah. She was sent to me for what was going to occur when my baby arrived. There's no mistakes. Yeah. And so she actually explained to me that I wasn't stopping the cycle of that inner critic, that the baby cry would take me to a time and place where I was on my own, walking the hallway with an unsettled baby and no husband, but that wasn't my reality, but I wasn't stopping myself. And so basically she said to me, Andrea, when your baby cries, it's normal and everything's fine. And she told me I needed to say that as a mantra.
Okay.
My baby's crying and I'm okay. Or my baby's crying, this is normal and I'm okay. And so I actually implemented that. And that when I could feel because it's a very physical reaction with anxiety and panic attacks, that I could feel my gut start to clench and I could feel my heart begin to race, and I would just continue to repeat this mantra. And for me, and I guess for most people that believe in this mindset stuff, is that it kept me here.
Yeah. So yeah, the past and the future is what most anxiety is driven by. Our experience in the past is basically we're worried that it's going to happen again or it's happening again. The future, we don't know it, so there's anxiety built around, will it happen again? But if you can get to the now and just deal with what's happening now, that's when you probably lower your levels of anxiety.
Yeah, that's right. And the reality, what is really going on here. Yeah. Because it's our mind, our ego, that takes us to an unreal situation, not an unreal like as in great, but a situation that is actually
unrealistic.
There we go. Thank you. Yeah. Yes. And so that mantra, I still went on medication again for a couple of months because I felt like Well,
that's a tool. You said it was a tool.
Absolutely, a tool. So, but that was 7 years ago and I haven't been on it again because I haven't relapsed. But for me, my belief system around my mental health is a bit like when you say a smoker is... You're always a smoker, you just don't smoke.
Yeah, sure.
I will always have mental health, it's just not acute.
Yes.
And so that's the thing, is this acceptance around this is who I am and I manage it really well.
So I guess the advantage too for you with your soulful living with Andrea, working with women, is because you've walked the walk, they're more likely to actually listen to what you have to say around the tools that have helped you if they're going through the same experience.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think it's how we make people feel. The reason I'm passionate about this is because I want to help people not feel how crap it is. I remember what it was like to have a panic attack. And I know that people deal with this for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And I found it excruciating for a few months. If there is something that I can say, suggest, allow them to come into an awareness on their own by shining a light on our inner critic and the way the stories actually make us shrink and feel like a failure or not enough or whatever goes on for people, then I have to do. I have to be able to share this with people.
So I'm figuring that almost 15 years ago, you weren't looking at this as your journey. That where you arrived right now wasn't part of the plan in your eyes. Wasn't part of the plan. So thinking of where you're at right now with your, I'll say life coaching. I understand what title you give to it and why you give it that, but with the whole concept of life coaching and helping others, does this feel right for you right now? That this is where you actually, this is your journey. This is where you're meant to be. It's not something you've created. It's actually you've arrived.
Pretty much. I actually did. It's really interesting you say that because I actually did a Facebook post about this yesterday. About it almost feels like I've arrived at the summit. My husband and I climbed Mount Coolum yesterday morning together, and I'm not overly fit at the moment. And the trek up was really hard, and you're puffed and your heart's racing. And you're thinking, probably would have been easier.
I did that one as a kid, and I know it wasn't. It was easier going down than it was going up.
Yeah. So, and it just when I got to the top and I looked out over where we have chosen to live, and the massive change that we've just taken on by relocating.
Even that, you said to me, you guys didn't plan on where you're going to end up. You just said you trust your intuition. You just said, I'll know when I know more or less, and we're just going to pick somewhere, but I'll know. So how did you arrive on the Sunshine Coast here in Queensland, Australia?
So basically it was there or Perth because we travelled last year and we didn't come to the sunny coast in that time. But it was just this feeling of we just knew that that's where we were being called to go, and we came up. We didn't know anyone, and the universe guided us in a couple of situations, and we ended up in Mullaney for a couple of weeks, and we came down onto the coast to have a little look around. And for the first 10 days, it just
felt right.
No, totally did not.
So why? Okay, so it didn't feel right. So
no.
So where did you land? Where have you landed?
So we're in Majimba, and that was what happened. We were over the other side, so Maroochydore, Mooloolaba, and I actually said to my husband after 10 days, like, this is not it. I don't know what we've done, but it's not right. And then we were heading over to meet a lady who lived in Majimba, and the minute we went over the bridge over the Maroochy River, I just knew. Yeah. And when we went down to Majimba, we just felt it. And
he must be very trusting of you and your intuition, I must say. It seems like he's just saying, yeah, lady, whatever, go with the flow. I'm with you 100%. It doesn't sound like it. I mean, obviously you're making decisions together, but for you to say it doesn't feel right, and like the rational man's going to say, come on, woman. As I think it's like we just need somewhere to live, but you've got this connection where you've got this concept that it's got to. Things have got to feel like this is where you're looking for something that a feeling as opposed to what.
So it's coming back into our heart and out of our head, and our inner critic, and the crazy stories of fear and doubt and just fear, I guess, comes from our thinking, but the feeling comes from our heart and a knowing that. Trusting in the journey that there are no mistakes, and I am who I am primarily because of who he is, because he has allowed this growth and this awareness and this journey that some people repel. Yes. And he'll pull a angel card every now and again just to humour me, but this is not necessarily what he feels is his truth.
Yeah, of course.
But the beauty of our relationship is that we are chalk and cheese, and we accept and love each other. immensely.
Thanks for your time, Andrea. I really appreciate you being here today and sharing with us your life story and your passion. And I'll make sure that I put anything in the description that will help people connect with you. But I really appreciate you sharing your story with us today.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Craig. It's been an honour, and if anything that I've said today even helps one person, then I feel like my job here on earth is done.
That's awesome. I feel the same, that any value that these things can bring to people, regardless of what they believe, just we all have a shared journey. Like our life, there's common things that come up for all of us, life lessons, and if someone can get something out of it, then I think we've done our job.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks for taking time to watch this video. If you enjoyed what you saw, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't yet subscribed, make sure you smash that subscribe button and also hit the bell button to get notified when new interviews are uploaded. Once again, thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you again sometime. Catch you later.